Joining me now is a UFC women's bantamweight fighter who recently launched Project Spearhead, a promising effort to unionize fighters, UFC fighters. There has been efforts and associations like this in the past, but obviously Leslie Smith here is joining me on the program, and she'll explain why this will hopefully work more so than past efforts. Leslie, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am happy to be talking about Project Spearhead and the organization efforts, and I'm glad that there's so many people who are interested in being supportive of it.
For sure. It shouldn't really come as a surprise. I don't know if it does or not, just because we've seen this in the past where, we had the PFA, the MMAAA, both of which you're familiar with. You were part of the PFA briefly. You talked about the MMAAA before. Is it surprising that you've already sort of had this support? Maybe from media. I know this isn't your first interview you've done. I think you've done multiple today already. And also from fighters, I would think are reaching out as well. Is the support so early on surprising, or did you expect it?
It's not surprising. I'm not going to say I expected it. I try to keep my expectations low in general. They say expectations are the root of dissatisfaction. So I do try to keep that limited in general. But I have been really pleasantly surprised by how many people have said good things about this effort and think that it's a positive thing. In fact, the very first review that I read was it said some really nice things about how this is looking like it's going to be the one that works. And for a second, I got very excited and happy. It was on combat sports law. And I got super excited and happy about seeing them say that it looks like this is going to be a good one. And then I realized that doesn't really matter. We can have all the support from the media and from all the fans, and even though it's kind of like a like on Facebook at this point. We can get a lot of likes, but they're not really the thing that matters. We really need the fighters to get involved to actually make a difference. So, yeah, it's a nice clap on the back, but at the end of the day, it's not the food that we need.
That definitely is a good point. So let's start from the very beginning. How long has Project Spearhead actually been in the works? Has it been in the works? I know you've been planning it for a little while, because I remember seeing you reach out. I think you were talking to Cajun Johnson and maybe Lucas Middlebrook as well on social media late last year, I think it was. Has it been in the works? Have you planned this basically since you parted ways with the MMA-FA last year?
Well, the goal has always been to be part of an organization effort for the fighters. That has been my goal from the second that I realized that we had a labor dispute and that I realized that we had a labor issue. Basically, from the time I realized what a labor issue was, I felt like we needed to do this. But I have been part of several different groups in the past that didn't pan out for various reasons, because they had outside backers, because they weren't trustworthy, because they don't, the groups have failed in the past. I feel like I was part of the PFA, and when I realized that one wasn't going to work, and I distanced myself from it, and so did Lucas Middlebrook. Shortly after that was when the MMAAA showed up, and I tried to play a part in that one. I had some conversations with Tim Kennedy and with Bjorn Rebney, neither one of which, Tim is a nice guy, but I didn't get the impression from either one of them, definitely not from Bjorn, that they wanted my input or my participation. And I wasn't trying to come up with anything counter to that, because they seemed like they had everything that they needed to make it happen. They had the high-profile fighters. They had the backing. The big problem, I think, was Bjorn Rebney. If he hadn't been part of it and there had been somebody else part of it, like me, who cared about the fighters and the fighters' needs and understood what the landscape, what the climate around being an MMA fighter in the UFC is right now, I feel like that could have succeeded. Even if it had Lucas Middlebrook, if it hadn't been me, if Lucas Middlebrook had been part of it, somebody who understands labor laws and who has been part of labor efforts, has built unions from the ground up, has joined unions or joined inside of a union effort that already exists. So he knows this stuff from the inside out. He could have made a really big difference in that, but it did not pan out. I waited a while to see if anything would. I reached out to the other fighters. Eventually, I wasn't able to get, after a couple initial conversations with Tim Kennedy, I wasn't able to get through to him anymore, and he retired. And then the other fighters were not making themselves available to me either. So finally, after feeling like the other efforts were dead in the water, is when I decided to go ahead and make this happen. This has always been the vision of Lucas Middlebrook and myself, is to have a grassroots, fighter-led, democratically organized and driven union. And we can't actually get that yet because we still need to find out if we're employees or independent contractors. Because right now we're called independent contractors, but we're being treated like employees. So once we can get that designation investigated and get a solid answer for what we actually are, then we can move forward either with the union effort or with an association.
So as far as getting Project Spearhead up and running, from basically the point when it came into your brain, when you started thinking about launching your own and not just joining another effort, until now, you launched back on Friday, about a week ago, just under a week ago. What were the major challenges from then to now?
Well, the biggest challenge is the education. That's the biggest challenge that we're still facing right now, is educating all the different fighters on what this means, on what the steps are, on how it can benefit them, showing the fighters that the struggles that they're going through are the same struggles as all the other fighters are and have and will go through. So education is the biggest thing. And to be honest, if I had all the time in the world, I probably wouldn't have done it yet. I probably would have, if I had an unlimited budget and all the time in the world, then I would have gone to the different gyms and gone and invited everybody that's a fighter, not just the UFC fighters, but all the fighters, to come to a meeting where I could wine and dine them and then explain the ins and outs of both the organization process, the benefits of organizing, and give them all a chance to ask their questions and say what they want to say. I would have liked to have done that before launching this, but my time is running out. I have been vocal about the union for quite some time now, and I am now on the last fight of my promotional contract with the UFC, and I plan on winning my fight against Aspen Ladd. It's going to be on April 21st in Atlantic City. That's about 10 weeks out from right now. Winning that fight will give me one of the better win streaks in the women's bantamweight division in the UFC right now. That'll give me 4 wins at bantamweight. I have 3 wins at bantamweight. I've won 3 out of the last 4 fights that I've had. The one loss that I had was against Chris Cyborg, but that was at a catch weight at 140 pounds. So I'm in a good position as far as my fighting career goes, but I'm I'm not deluding myself that the UFC has any obligation to keep me on just because I'm winning, because I know that they don't. That's part of the independent contractor relationship, is that they have no obligation to re-sign me. And so if I am not actually in the UFC and I'm working on all of these efforts, not only is my access going to be restricted, but my relevance will be as well. And in addition to my access and my relevance, I feel like how genuine I'm being. I feel like if I waited until after whatever happens, maybe I do get another contract with the UFC, or maybe I don't get another contract with the UFC. But if I wait until I'm out of contract with the UFC, I feel like it'll be less authentic to make this effort and to put everything into it, because well, I'll just be yelling from the sidelines at that point. Like right now, I'm in the game. I've got a fight coming up. I've got a horse in the game. I am my own horse in the game. But if I were to wait any longer until maybe I'm not, then it's not the same.
It's an interesting point. So if I'm doing the math correctly, does that mean you signed a 4-fight deal before the Cyborg fight, which would make that this your last one?
Yes.
Okay. Is it difficult to balance your fighting career and now this? Like this, it's not like you can do this sort of just half-heartedly in a way. You gotta go full in on trying to create a union, trying to unionize fighters. Just because we've seen so many failed attempts in the past, it's not something you can do just a little bit here and there and forget about it, or else you'll just end up like the PFA or the MMAAA. Do you expect it'll be difficult to balance fighting, considering you have a fight coming up in April, and organizing fighters, or trying to?
To illustrate my answer of no, that I don't think it's going to be more difficult, I'd like to point out that most of the time when fighters have children, that there's two ways that it can go, whether they're male or female, the fighters. When they have children, they can either stop their endeavors and devote all of their time to that child, which some people do, and that's their choice, and that's good for them, and I'm happy for them. But a lot of other ones draw new inspiration to succeed in their fighting from the child that they have. So I don't have any children. I don't know if I want to continue the metaphor to make it seem like Project Spearhead is my child. That's not what I'm going for. But I guess what I'm saying is that it's giving me something else to fight for. It's giving me an extra incentive to fight. And all of us in the UFC, unless it's in our contract that we cannot be cut, can be cut at any point in time for any reason. In fact, I am probably one of the few people who has even a modicum of protection from getting cut at any point in time, because if the UFC had cut me in the past, then they would have had to prove that it wasn't in retaliation for my organization of the fighters. And that is a level of protection.
Does that come into play when your contract will be expired after the lad fight? Like, will that count when you're a quote, restricted free agent, so to speak?
We'll see. I don't think so, because if I was an employee and then I was let go after that fight, then yeah, I would be able to say, hey, you're my boss. And under the federal law prohibits a boss, an employer, from penalizing somebody for organizing, for seeking to organize. But I'm an independent contractor, and that's definitely one of the reasons that it's been in the UFC's best interest to keep everyone classified as independent contractors is because they don't have to observe those federal regulations.
Have you tried to renegotiate a contract before this fight, or will you, considering it's still 10 weeks out?
No, I will not, and I have not. Before my last contract, because like you pointed out, I did negotiate a new contract right before the Cyborg fight. Technically, or usually what people do is they negotiate a new contract before the last fight on their contract. The UFC reached out to me after my first promotional contract was done, after my third fight in the UFC, and they asked if I wanted to negotiate, and I talked to Nate Diaz about it, and he said, don't do it, because I can get my next fight, I can get my next win, I can make a big deal out of it, and then I can gain more leverage as far as negotiating a better contract. So I declined and said, no, thank you. I don't want to negotiate a new contract before this next fight. And it worked out really well. I won the fight. It was against Rin Nakai, I think, in Australia. And then the very next day, I was talking to Sean Shelby at a zoo, standing next to a dingo and a koala bear. And that was how the Cyborg fight came about, and we negotiated the next contract for that. So Nate Diaz had great advice, and I'm not going to go back on that now, especially where I'm at right now. I feel like even though I have had this win streak, I'm on a 2-fight win streak right now. I don't feel like that's as much negotiating leverage on my side as a 3-fight win streak or 4 fights at bantamweight. So I'm going to wait until after this next fight to do any negotiating. And I'm at my contract right now is for $31,000, and $31,000 is what I get paid to show and then to win. And that's going to be another obstacle, because at this point, it will not be worth it for me to re-sign for $33,000 or something like that. It's going to have to be at least $100,000, and that's probably the lowest that I'm going to go. And I feel like it should be even higher than that. We'll probably start at $250,000. And I am one of the most exciting fighters in the women's bantamweight. Well, gosh, not even just in the women, but not even just in my division, but I'm a very exciting fighter. People really like to watch me fight. I bring it every time. I make weight. But I'm not going to sign myself away for less than what I feel I'm worth.
So when you say the 100 number is sort of where the bare minimum, are you talking 50-50? 50 to show, 50 to win?
No, I'm talking about 100. Yeah.
Okay. Or just 100 no win bonus.
Yeah, 100,000 to show is going to be the minimum for what I would even consider coming and continuing to fight for.
Okay. If you don't get re-signed to the UFC, will you retire or go back to Invicta? Obviously, you have a good relationship with them. What would your plan be, or would you just stop fighting?
Well, I'm actually currently looking at applying to the Sorbonne University in Paris, where I could go study. Maybe I've only got an associate degree right now, but I've always wanted to go back to school and to be able to go out there and study, train. Who knows? If I don't get to re-sign, though, that is definitely what I'm going to look to do for at least a year, is to go and be a student. And then who knows what will happen then. Maybe we'll get to negotiate and the money will be worth it and I will get to come fight again. Or maybe it won't be, and maybe I'll keep going with schooling and study international law and be able to come back and be be a major player on the UFC Fighters Union once it's established. I don't know. But if I don't get signed, I'm going back to school.
Interesting. Okay, I want to talk a little more about Project Spearhead. The burning question everybody wants the answer to, everybody wants to hear you talk about, is why will Project Spearhead succeed and go further than MMA, AA, PFA, any other efforts in the past?
Because the reason that Project Spearhead is going to be successful where other things have failed, or at least it has more potential to be successful where the other ones have failed, is because it is entirely fighter driven. It's a grassroots effort that's coming from the fighters within the organization. There's no outside influences. There's no outside money. There's no outside agendas. There's no blaring discrepancies. No glaring inconsistencies between the past habits of anybody who's in it. For example, the MMAAA had Bjorn Rebney, who said that he was there to make things better for fighters. Well, if he wanted to make things better for fighters, he had the opportunity to do so when he was the head of an organization. So his behavior in the past didn't really line up with what he was saying his goal for the future was. So I feel like that was the main reason that didn't work, was because Bjorn Rebney was a big part of it, and he had his own agenda. I don't know what that agenda was, but his past didn't indicate that he was being truthful with being purely in it to support the fighters' well-being. And then there was the PFA, and that one didn't work because Jeff Boris started a committee of agents that he did not tell me or Lucas Middlebrook about. And so when the confidentiality became an issue, he gave them all the information, and that wasn't confidential. That I felt like was a breach of the confidentiality. And so that didn't work, and that was why. And that's why this is different, is because it's not got any outside agenda. It doesn't have anyone who isn't going to respect the need for the confidentiality. And we are driven, if you look at the 3 people who are involved in it right now, there's myself as the interim president, there's Kajan Johnson as the interim vice president, and there's Lucas Middlebrook. All 3 of us have consistently been working to improve the state for fighters for a long time, and there's good reason to believe that we're going to continue to do so.
How nice is it having Kajan Johnson on board so soon? Because I was actually the one who informed him about Project Spearhead, and you know, I sent him a text because I think I had interviewed him just a few days prior, and you know, a couple days later he's on the you know, the list. His face is on the website already. How big of a help will it be having him as the interim vice president already?
It's a huge help, because just like that, it went from being my union to being not just my union. It's literally impossible for me to have a union, because a union is about bringing people together. And so it's impossible to have a one-person union. So it was never supposed to be my union, and already having another person who's part of it, who in fact has been a part of the MMAF. No, that.
Yep.
You know the. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, he has been a part of that, even though I am no longer a part of that. Even though we, separated the MMAFA and myself because we were going in opposite directions. Even though I didn't think they were opposite directions. I feel like that adds even more. In the Combat Law Sports Review, they labeled this effort as big tent politics, and I had to Google that term. Did you already know what that term is? Do you know what that is?
I honestly don't know.
Ha, me either. Well, I feel better. So what it meant is it is politics where it can include people who come from different perspectives and ideologies and have different goals. So I feel like this is a great example of that because Cajun and I haven't always seen eye to eye on how to attack the issues, but we've always agreed there are issues that need to be dealt with. And so I think that Cajun, not only having him as another person, just another individual on the group, but I feel like having him who shares a different perspective on how to deal with the issues, but agrees that the issues need to be dealt with, I think that he brings a lot to the table, fills it out quite a bit.
Certainly. Now, I don't need you or want you to go through the exact process. It's on the website already, and we'd be here for another hour if you were to go through all the steps. But basically, you need 30% of fighters to sign authorization cards. Then you need the National Labor Relations Board to determine are you contractors or are you employees. How from now until when this can actually happen and when that can get passed and approved, and when you can actually form a union, when you get a simple majority vote from fighters as well, how long do you expect this process to actually take? Like, obviously getting fighters on board with the authorization cards, we don't know, you don't know how long that'll take. That'll determine a lot of it, I would assume, but the rest of it, having the National Labor Relations Board say whether or not you're independent contractors or employees, and then going from there, how long do you think that'll all take?
I don't know how long it's all going to take. I could not tell you. The one time limit that I am 100% sure of is that the authorization cards are only good for 1 year from when they are signed. So all that I can definitely tell you as far as time is that we need to get all the signatures within a year.
Okay, interesting. I know Project Spearhead just launched, but with and also obviously the authorization cards for fighters are confidential. That's a big part of this. Fighters don't have to go and put their faces out to support the unionization of UFC fighters. How is the interest, though, generally speaking, and can you say how many cards have already been signed, or is that confidential too?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about how many cards or anyone's names have been signed. Was there another question in there?
Just the interest. Like, generally speaking, is the interest there already?
Yeah, well, leading up to this, I've had tons of fighters come up to me and tell me that they really appreciate what I'm doing. They really like the spirit of it. They would love to be a part of it, but they're scared for their jobs. They're scared that they're going to get cut if they speak out. They're scared that they're going to get cut anyway, even if they don't speak out. The UFC has a lot of people scared to speak up, and that's what I want to change. We don't need a climate of fear that's governing the fighters in the UFC. We need a climate of not fear. We need a climate where fighters' opinions and rights and desires and needs are valued and weighed in when making decisions.
On the interim executive board on projectspearhead.com, you have, of course, yourself, you have Cajun, and then you have a blank face do be determined for secretary/treasurer. To that point, do you expect other fighters, at least one other fighter, to step up and be willing to put their face out there? Because that's been a big issue, as you just talked about, fighters not wanting to put their jobs at risk and risking their careers by going against the UFC publicly. Do you expect at least a fighter or two to be willing to be on this board, or do you expect just them to want to sign the actual cards?
I'm keeping my expectations low because I don't want to be disappointed. I'd rather be pleasantly surprised. So I don't have any expectations, but we actually have room for more than just one person on this interim board. We can have 7 people on the interim board. Well, we could have as many people as we want on the interim board, but I feel like 7 is a good number. It's got a lot, that'll create the opportunity to have 7 different perspectives and still not be an even number so that when we vote on things, we won't be stuck. So I don't have any expectations, but I do hope that people will want to be a part of this and will want to speak up. And I know that the climate has been changing for quite some time now. Nobody used to speak up about things, and now it's very common to see people go onto Twitter to air out their frustrations with the UFC. So I've tweeted in the past that all these fighters that have issues with the UFC that they go and air on Twitter, what they need to be doing is following up whatever complaint they have with because I support a union, because that then gives them the same protection as I currently have, which is that an employer, a boss, cannot penalize somebody for seeking to organize within their workplace.
Last question for you, Leslie, and I do appreciate the time, and I know we've gone on for quite a while, but this is important stuff, and so I'm happy getting your thoughts and ideas on this. Recently, Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier, obviously, who are fighting in July, or I believe it was DC that said in an interview after this fight was announced that he called Stipe and said, hey, they basically went back and forth and said, let's work together to get more money. Let's not, do this fantastic super fight, this lucrative fight for $500 a show as usual. They basically said they agreed to only take the fight for more money than their current contract said they would get. Do you feel like what are your thoughts on that, and do you look at that as a step in the right direction for fighters who, as you said, could be a little more educated in this whole subject of unions and all that?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful step in the right direction. And I'm encouraged, I'm heartened, and I'm thrilled to see that that's what they did. I was very happy to hear about it because we need to fight with, we train, we fight, and we let our emotions become a part of that. But when it comes to business, we can't be letting our emotions become a part of that. And it sounds like those guys were able to step away from the fact that they're going to be facing each other in a couple months and trying to hurt each other as badly as they can. They were able to step away and make the most intelligent business decision for themselves, for their families, for their future selves. And that is something that we should all aspire to be able to do.
Last thing for you, Leslie, complete the 180 in as far as a step in a different direction. How do you get the job done? You're taking on Aspen Ladd, the UFC Fight Night in Atlantic City on April 21st. How do you feel like you get past Aspen Ladd?
Very happily and enthusiastically. I think that she is a great fighter, but I don't think that she is on my level yet. I am, she's from the Bay Area. Like, we train together. And so I feel like I have a mental edge over her. I know where I'm stronger than her, and I know where she's the most dangerous. She might feel like she has the same thing, but I gotta have a lot more experience in this game. I've been doing this for a whole lot longer. I've had coaches that I deferred to for a long time, and then I realized that no one can be a Mr. Miyagi for you in the MMA game. Ultimately, a person has to come down to their own decisions and be the one who's in control of their own mind and their own decisions. And she's a very young fighter. I believe that she has been with her coach for a long time, since before she was even 18. And so I don't know if she has the type of autonomy in her decision-making that is going to enable her to make the decisions on the fly that she's going to need to make in order to meet me inside of the cage.
Leslie, thank you very much for the time. Really, really appreciate it. Before I let you go, remind everybody where they can find you on social media, and obviously where they can find Project Spearhead on social media, the website, everything you got to plug, and any shout-outs for sponsors or anything else. The floor is yours.
Hey, thanks. Well, first, I want to say thank you to you, Nick Baldwin. It's always a pleasure getting to talk to you. If anybody wants to follow me, which I hope everyone does, I'm on Instagram at Leslie Smith MMA. That's definitely the best place to find me. I'm also on Twitter at Leslie Smith _GF. The GF is for Gracie Fighter. And then I'm on Facebook too, but that's usually where I do my more personal stuff. So I don't know if people are going to be as excited about that. There's a bunch of pictures of gardening and things like that on there. So maybe stick to the other two if you're excited about the fighting, if you're excited about the organization efforts. And I appreciate everyone's support.